Hey folks, for today we're going to show you FontAgent version 10, the client software and the administrator interface. We're going to go over some basic functionality of the software. As you can see, it's very similar to most other font managers in the sense of the placement of things, such as where the fonts are on the left side and where information about the font is on the right side. This is all the metadata of individual fonts, and of course is completely searchable inside of FontAgent. We also have a set function here that allows you to select a set and make it a startup set, add a comment if you want. This is all local site control for you as an individual user and does not have anything to do with the server per se. So this is just a user connection function. And then we have all of the sets. You can have sets inside of sets, or what they call parent-child sets or nested sets within FontAgent here. Anything denoted with the cloud little icon here states that it's coming from the server. If it does not have that, it is a local database font. And again, you select and you can see things about that font, maybe about the tags that have been added to the font. You could look at glyphs. You could compare multiple types of fonts here, and you can actually print them out if you want. We have a feature called Smart Sets. That's a very useful tool for people that are using a particular foundry or particular weight, slant, or proportion of a font that they're using on jobs, where they can do a smart search and edit their font set. Similar to what Apple Mail does for rules, you can add certain functionality in a smart set, so you're pulling up fonts that are based on certain criteria for yourself. Font tags, you can have a certain font tag, maybe it says Adobe, it'll pull up all the Adobe fonts. If you say it's a certain foundry, you could say I want a certain foundry name, you could say Adobe, and it will give you all the Adobe fonts here in the smart set. So I have 2,500 or so. Neat little feature. It helps you search, sort, and better define fonts from large numbers to smaller numbers to work with. Very helpful tool. System sets, as you know, and then there's historical data down here. So anything as a user, if you're allowed to import fonts, it'll show up here by date, or you can rename these by project or by customer or by foundry, whatever suits your workflow needs. So that's a very handy tool. We go into FontAgent, we look at the settings tab. Currently we're connected to a cloud server. You can also connect to a local server. We're using both products and still will continue to. We have an activation functionality that gives you certain functions in activation, including reactivating certain fonts at startup here. Cache cleaner and a maintenance update only software tool in there. We have tools for managing extensions. Currently we support auto activation for Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign in the Macintosh and PC, also InCopy. Currently, the Macintosh does not require a plugin for Photoshop or Illustrator. So it's not going to show up here, but it will auto-activate. We have different views you can look at things, different tools you can use, share, unshare, sync, etc. You have the ability to import and export fonts here. You can even just drag and drop your fonts right into your tool and upload them if you have permissions to do so. If you have permissions to upload a font, you can go over here and say share font set. That will send it to the server. Once it's at the server, then the administrator can decide who gets it. We have what we call a top-down configuration. That means that users can share fonts, but the administrator ultimately has to decide where they go. That way you have one point of control for all the fonts being distributed to all of your users. You can also do some other things here in these contextual menus. We also have a little gear down here that gives you some of the same functionality. So that's handy. So users can be defined in permissions to upload sets to the server, or in this case from the client, it's sharing the font set to the server. But it does not share it to a specific group or user. It shares it to either if it's an individual font to the font section of the server, or if it's a set of fonts, it'll create a set on the server for you to share with a group of users if you so choose. Let's take a look at what the server offers, right? So the client software, of course, is good for the Mac or PC. They have very similar functions and features, so they're very easy to learn and use. And let's take a look at some of the previews here too. So you have some different previews by family, by foundry, by tag, WYSIWYG if you want. Again, you can search for all of this anywhere you like. If you want to look at things by foundry, you can do that. You can move, what versions of things are. Again, very easy to search and sort through all of the data inside of the font manager as far as fonts go and the metadata. If you are somebody who uses Adobe Fonts in Creative Cloud, we give you a ability to look at those fonts that are stored in the Adobe Fonts folder in Creative Cloud. Once they've been activated, they'll download to the computer, but they're not visible unless you're using their applications. Here we can actually show you where they are, and you can create groups and sets and work with those. Okay. Up here we have some searching, and we have the manual synchronization button for the server right here. So you can see it's synchronizing. These are the activation buttons for auto activation, or manual activation back and forth. And then here is a search by type that you can choose with the binoculars. And so that's a lot of the basic functions in the client software. As you can see, it's something that's very familiar, easy to use, etc. And then there's one final feature that sets us apart from everybody else. If you're looking at a large group of fonts, you can use the player functionality and hit the play button, and Font Agent will go through a number of fonts for you. They'll stay here, and then you can use create set by selection like this and create a new set of fonts that you chose from the player. That's also a handy feature. I invite you to take a look at that. Now let's go on to the server itself. I'm going to go ahead and load the browser here, and I'm going to move it over, and we're going to look at the Font Agent server live. And I'm going to log in. I'm going to use the credentials that I provided Insider to log in. And there's my credentials. I'm going to go ahead and put those in and sign in. And once I do that, I'm going to look at the server browser interface from left to right. And on the left, you have all of your features. You can look at fonts. You can look at tags, sets, licenses, users, groups, directory services like Azure or Okta, machines. Do you want to look at things by machine? You want to generate reports by machine, see who's using what by machine? You can do there. And then a server-side settings tab. If your selected fonts, as far as features go, you go down to the middle here. These are the functions of each feature. If I want to add users to a particular font, I would do it here. Note, we also allow you to expire users or fonts if you so choose. You can also assign a font to a group. You can also assign font to a set. You can also add a tag to a font. And here's some lists of some tags. You can add your license file to a font. And by the way, you can add more than one license file itself. Here you could add a license file for broadcast, one for print, one for PDF, one for web. And that can be attached to the font and be properly counted as needed in our font reporting. And once you get to font usage, this is where we generate reports. You can look at what's going on in the server by font usage by an individual font. It'll tell you who it's been assigned to, what server it's coming from, etc., etc. If you so choose, if you select a new font, of course that will change and it'll give you different information. You can download a report file, which we'll show you a little bit later. Here. If you go to tags, tagging is a functionality that allows you to assign certain things like font classification, what the fonts are being used for, what job type they might be used for, EPUB embedding. Maybe there is a certain foundry that you're using and you wanted to note that in the tag. You can attach that to the font. Not only can you attach it to an individual font, but you can attach it to a large amount of fonts, and you can search and sort those fonts as needed to add tags. So it's a pretty quick process. Moving on. Sets. Once you upload fonts to the server, you can upload them either by individual font or by set. They will show up here. How do you create a set? Well, you go over to the right and you say add set. Enter in the name. Do you want it to be a startup set? Maybe you do for certain programs that are outside of auto activation capability, and you have a set of 4 or 5 fonts that are style guide fonts that you may or may not need to use, and this is a perfect application for that. But you can create sets and groups on the server if you just decide to upload all the fonts to the server. Sets can also be continually added to. You can add users to those sets simply by going in and selecting the users you want. You can filter that. You can add things to a group. Say I want to add this to the Disney group, and now the Disney group will get these fonts. And if I want that to expire at a certain date, I can. I can say in 6 months I want these fonts to be called back to the server automatically. If I want to add a license to this group of fonts, maybe I'm going to use the Adobe license because that's what they are. And I'll go ahead and save that. Now I've saved this Adobe license to these fonts with over 2,800 fonts. It was very fast. I can also look at the font usage of this particular one by expanding on it and taking a look at who's using what if I need to, and download a spreadsheet. So lots of places to get reporting and feedback for how fonts are being used in the service. Licensing, this is important because fonts and their foundries don't embed licensing in the font, so you have to manually enter it in. How do you do that? Well, here you can see I've created a lot of fonts. They give you some basic information on how many fonts has that license assigned to it and how many licenses you have for that font. But to add a license, you would simply go in and say add license. There's 3 main things you have to add: the license name, the license type, and the license count. You can also add purchase order information. Add a description here to define what it is and what it's used for if you need to for the administrator. You can also drag and drop a PDF here of all the licensing and purchasing information if you need to do so. Once you've done that, you'll end up with these license files here, and you can see I've got some information in all of these fonts here about each font. Now if I want to assign them to an individual font, I can just say, okay, let's assign that to an individual font. I'll just say this one here, and I've done it. Now that font has a license assigned to it, and it'll be counted appropriately in the reporting. Maybe I need to add this license to a set of fonts. Maybe I'll add it to Airflow. And now that license is added to Airflow, etc. Again, looking at the reporting of what you just did in the license tab. So again, you have the ability to look at reporting by license. So you select the various licenses you have, and we give you the ability to look at that reporting and how things are being used. It's very, very handy. Users can come in 2 ways. You could manually enter in the users over here. You can add them in from a CSV list. You can add them as a single user. You can invite them, or you can email them once you've added them to the system. If you're going to add a single user, it's very simple: first name, last name, email address. If you want to give them a password because maybe they're a freelancer, you can do that here. Save it and send them the information in an email invite. They can onboard themselves, as there's a download link for the client software for them to onboard themselves if they need to. And again, when you look at users and you've created users, all users are synchronization only until you make changes. If you want users to have certain functionality, here are the permissions you can add or not. If you want people to administrate the whole server, you can give them grant rights to do that, or just a group. You can have them just upload fonts to the server so the administrators can distribute them to the appropriate people. You can have them edit license information. That gives them the ability to go in and actually create licensing, if you so choose. And there's a couple others down there below. As you can see, we give you a lot of permissions to work with for those individual users. If you're working in groups, you can add a group to a specific user. It's very easy. Click, click. The group is now added. If you want it to expire in the future, you can do it here. Sets. You want to add a set to a specific user, you can certainly do that here as well. And you can also look at the font reporting. We get to groups over here, and you again add a group just like you would a user. Add group. You can add permissions for that group, so everybody in that group has those permissions. Let's say you have a group of people that you want to have the ability to upload fonts to the server. You can give that to access to everybody, or everybody have access to added license. If you put people in a group, whatever permission you choose, they will all have it. Add users to that group. add sets to that group. Again, the same process, right? So once you learn one thing, you can have all of it work the same way. Directory services. Using Azure, no problem. Here's an Azure instance. I've just authenticated it with a tenant ID, given it a display name, and now I can pull in through AddOath my Azure group lists. Let's take a look at that. Let's go ahead and fetch the groups. Here are my groups. Here's my users. I can sync them individually or all at once, and it happens about every hour. And that's Azure Groups. There are some specialty configurations that you can do for certain situations. We do provide a number of different ways to onboard people. As well as Azure, we also provide Okta identity verification services. Just note that. Machine tab. You want to look at things by machine. We give you the ability to look at things by machine and what that font usage of that machine has been. We also give you the ability to look at what version of software they're on. One of the key features here is we allow you to look at what versions of software they're on, whether you want to update people or work with older versions on older equipment. So you're not pinholed into just using the most current software. This may be helpful if you have legacy output equipment that may require a huge expense. And that's machines. And again, you can generate reports. You go to Settings tab. Settings is interesting because this is the server-side settings. And when you work with server-side settings, what you're doing is you're enabling the ability for the server to look at a server properties file created on the client software in order to do things like lock and hide system fonts. The login method, if you're using Azure or Okta, synchronization interval between 1 and 72 hours. You configure the client. It creates a little server properties file that you can then add to your users either with remote software or individually. And it tells the server, hey, I need to authenticate with Azure, or I want to make sure the system folders are locked. And our setup documentation will give you the appropriate locations for those things. We have online help with this button over here and so forth, but we give you a full featured license compliance reporting, Active Directory services, groups, users, licensing, sets, tags, all the neat things you need to create multiple different types of workflows for each category, such as production, freelance work, creative, pre-press, all those good things. Our solution supports, of course, OpenType and TrueType. We support software all the way up through Tahoe currently, and we are going to be releasing a new product that will, of course, be more focused on major enterprise publishing systems such as Woodwing, etc. I hope this was helpful. Thank you for watching.